of the common problems that beginning law students face is developing their aptitude for critical analysis. You may have had this yourself. You may have had comments on papers that say, this is just a descriptive paper. This is too descriptive. Where's your analysis? And this video is an attempt to explain to you what that means. And to explain that this isn't something that's an inbuilt capability. You're not born with the ability to critically analyse something. It's something you learn, and it's a skill that you exercise and develop over time. Now, the fundamental issue about research papers, academic or otherwise, is that they need to have a point. There needs to be an argument at the basis of the whole thing. It's not just a show and tell exercise. And this is, I think, where people unknowingly go down the wrong path. They start thinking about a research paper as, here's a whole lot of things I found, without thinking about, well, what do they all mean when you put them together, when you put them in a sequence? What argument is being pursued from section to section? And a key part of that is the issue of voice. Where does your individual voice sit in this process? And there's a balancing act between your individual voice and your professional objectivity. So you don't want to be doing the sort of clumsy things where you say, I think, or the author thinks, because the paper is your opinion. And you may have been told in the past not to put your opinion in a paper, which is actually quite wrong, because if you don't put your opinion in your paper, it has no point. But I guess what the people are clumsily trying to tell you when they say that is you have to back up your opinion with evidence and analysis. It's not just about a matter of saying, hey, I think the death penalty is a bad idea, because I think it's bad. It's saying, here's some statistical analysis, here's what other theorists have to say about it. Here are some of the pro-death penalty arguments, and here are why there are flaws in those particular arguments. So it is opinion, but it's not mere opinion. It's backed up with evidence, it's backed up with analysis. And that's where we get back to the idea of critical analysis, critical reasoning. And this is the foundation of the scientific approach to creation of knowledge. And that's really about the removal of bias. And yeah, we can't be completely free of bias, but we can be aware of it and we can minimize it. So we can never really speak as truly enlightened beings who sit above the system, the social system we live in. But we can be conscious of things that occur that might bias our perspectives and try to avoid them. So a form of critical analysis in a research paper is where you have your opinion, but you are rigorous in the way you express it, and you test that opinion, and you are objective in the way that you avoid biases in that opinion. Now here we have a list of the elements of critical analysis. I've drawn this list from a lot of different sources, and I've put some of my own thoughts in there as well. So it's not a very short, convenient list, and unfortunately the letters don't spell out a nice acronym for you to remember, but it is a list of elements for you to bear in mind, and I think this will help to explain to you what critical analysis is. So first of all, we have evidence. You need to have something to back up your opinion. These could be facts obtained via a credible source, and in law this is sometimes an authority. And there's that strange relationship in law between facts and authority. And sometimes authorities don't need facts to back themselves up. But in law, we will often use an authority primarily in the black letter context, but in the broader spectrum of legal research, we also rely on facts obtained through objective research. So that's the first thing you need to have. It's not just a mere expression or a rant about what you think. You've got evidence to back up everything you say. The second point is balance. You need to keep in mind the different perspectives on a particular issue and present them in a balanced way. You need to explore different perspectives and show that you haven't been narrow in your thinking. The next point is interpretation. And this is where your theories often come into hand. They're often handy, that you can look at a particular set of evidence, a certain proposition, and interpret what that means, how you apply that in context. And often what you go to is a set of theories or legal principles or ideas and say, well, this helps me understand. This helps me explain what that means. So interpretation is putting that meaning into context. Next point is assess. Look for weaknesses in the claims, both yours and the counter-arguments. Make sure your chain of thought is logical, that there's a chain of a connection between each point. Be aware of different ways of explaining certain phenomenon. Our history is full of people believing one thing when there's actually a different explanation for it. So you need to show that you've thought about that. You've looked at the different angles. You've also considered what assumptions a particular point of view is based on and been able to unpack those assumptions and take them apart. The next point is application, and that's taking everything you've done so far and applying it to the particular scenario, facts, or context that you are using it for in your research. And again, this is something that has to happen in an unbiased way. It's all right to have an opinion, and having an opinion doesn't mean that you're biased, because your opinion, hopefully, is the correct opinion. But you need to show that as you apply it, you're not pulling any tricks, you're not trying to do any sleight of hand there, that you're applying it in a way that's fair to all the different perspectives involved. The third one I've put in here is something that law uses a lot, and that's the use of analogy. And that's where you don't have direct evidence that something is the same, but you can say, here's a similar circumstance. And you say, this is a similar circumstance, and I think it applies here for the following reasons. Does it necessarily apply in other disciplines so much? I mean, in chemistry, you don't say, well, this element's next to the other one on the periodic table, therefore it's probably going to be kind of similar. That doesn't work. But in law, we do it all the time. We look at similar situations, and we try and look at the underlying reasoning, and we say, we think these are the same because of this, or we say we don't think they're the same. We think they're different because there are reasons for them. The final element of critical analysis is judgment. So you make a decision, you stand by it, you're persuasive, it's logical, and you back it up. Your final judgment is a synthesis of research that fairly represents the different opinions, theories, and sources, but at the end of the day, this entire process is about you presenting that judgment, that opinion, that clear statement of what the paper is about, what your point is, and why the reader should care about it. Now, if there's a hidden agenda that is underlying all of this, is that you need to be clear about showing what labour you've done, what work you've done in creating a research paper. So it's about showing your working, to use a sort of a maths analogy. You've done the hard work, you've done all this research, you've done all this work. You need to show us how you've got to that end point, and you do that through critical analysis, and that's where you put yourself into the particular paper. Now, a couple more points. What do we mean by critical? And there is a unfortunate tendency, and I think the internet's a bad example of this quite often, of thinking critical means finger pointing, of taking something and finding out what's wrong with it, and saying it's bad because of that's racist, or that's sexist, or that's offensive to whatever particular perspective you like. We see all too much of this on the internet. Critical analysis, sure, if something actually has a repugnant element to it, that can be part of it, but most things don't. Even things that are skewed or biased in some particular way, there's usually reasons why it is the way it is. And it's a lot more productive to be able to critically analyse in a way that's objective and to actually have a look at the issues and have a look at the implications of the issue than to simply point a finger at something and say, that's racist, that's offensive, or whatever, or that's stupid, or that's wrong. And the important part of this for the academic world is the idea of academic discourse is based on people being able to have a conversation with each other, to be able to publish in a way that's respectful, that is critical of other people's perspective, it's rigorous, it looks at the flaws, but it's not a way that's just pointing a finger at someone and telling them they're wrong or that they're stupid. Now, if you search for critical thinking online and critical analysis, you'll find heaps of references, and I've got a couple of them in the notes below the video. Here's one example of the Foundation for Critical Thinking's elements of thought. It's a different way of slicing up the pie, a different way of thinking about those elements. So there's not one particular true answer, and this one has some interesting definitions and some interesting things to have a look at, and has some neat little interactive model. So have a bit of a look, have a bit of a think about this. It's something where I've given you one example of how I think it works. Other people are going to have different ideas, but the important thing is that you're thinking about it, that you're actually analysing and understanding how critical thought works and what that means for you in the writing process. So what are some of the pitfalls that we often see where students stumble along the path of developing that critical voice in critical analysis? There's a series of these here. This is not all of them, but these are some things I think for you to think about. First of all, restating the question or questions. This is something that can often get in the way of developing analysis or developing a flow. If the first thing you do in a paper is actually reproduce the question that you're asked, or go through the question and just restate the question in your own words, you're not actually getting into the core of what you're doing. You're not actually talking about what your argument is, where you're going. You're not leading the reader in. From an assessment point of view, this is a problem because the assessor already knows what the question is. You're wasting valuable time prevaricating at this point and not getting into, well, this is my argument, this is the point. In any other context, what you'll find you're doing is, again, just sort of treading water and wasting time instead of getting into, well, what is this all about? What is it that I have to say? Connected to this issue is the question of background knowledge and what you need to presume. And this is a problem for any particular writing process, particularly in law, because there's a lot of technical knowledge implied. And you need to have a vision in your head, or an image in your head, of who your model reader is and what do they know. So if it's a paper on contract law, you can probably assume that the reader is someone who is familiar with basic contract law and principles. You're not going to have to explain what a contract is, for example. But if your paper is on a very specific area, you might think that even someone with a reasonably thorough knowledge of the field might not know these particular things, and those are the things that you need to illustrate. And it's in choosing those things that you need to explain that I think the balance of the descriptive versus the critical analysis part of a paper can go off. And when people get over-explanatory and they feel as though they have to explain everything, particularly they start going to dictionary definitions of things, which you should almost never have to do. But that's where you actually then lose the thread of your argument, and you can spend pages, you can spend half your word count re-examining and laying out those foundations, often when you don't have to, particularly in the case of assignments where the assessor already knows those things. The next issue is treading water. And that's where you're anxious about being able to meet the word count, and it shows, and you're kind of spending paragraphs that don't actually say anything, that just go round and round in circles because you're thinking, I'm never going to make these 3,000 words or 2,000 words, and it's clear that you're padding. You might not be clear to you that you're doing it. It usually isn't, but it's usually pretty clear to the person that's reading it, and you need to have someone either develop a good sense of that yourself or have someone read your paper before you submit it to check that that you're not doing that. There's not these sections that are just filler, that are just there because you're just sort of thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure what to say, so I will just put in some of these general statements. Again, this is a connected point. The lack of clear structure to guide you can also lead you to do this. And you can end up with a structure that, rather than having a backbone that runs through a paper, ends up with these branches that go off to sort of side trips to nowhere and leave the reader thinking, well, okay, fair enough, that's probably true, but why did you put that in there? And it's because you didn't have that clear structure to start with. So you can ask that question as you go. Do I need to say this? And often, these are the things that can just be trimmed. Maybe you need more signposts in there to explain to the reader why you're doing it. There's a matter of faith that you have to engage with the reader and say, look, bear with me. I'm going to talk about this for about half a page, but there's a reason for it because it's going to tie back in. So you can put little signposts in there that say that sort of thing in more formal terms. But often the reader is left with sort of passages looking at it going, well, yeah, great, that's in the field, but why are you telling me this? Another problem is the shotgun approach. And that's where, rather than arguing a clear, well-organised point, some people just decide to load their shotgun with issues and facts and info and authorities, throw it at the screen and see what sticks. See that something hits along the way. Again, that's often a flaw, and it's something that's very clear to the reader, and it's a lack of structure, lack of organisation, or maybe a lack of confidence in your own arguments. And you think, well, rather than making one clear argument, I'll make 5 kind of different ones, and hopefully one of those will be the right ones. And that leads to the final point, for the final pitfall, I think, is often these things show a lack of confidence in the student. And that's understandable, because you're a novice, you're beginning, you're on the start of your academic career or your professional career, your writing career. But it's something you need to overcome. You need to develop that sense of confidence. One thing that we see quite often that's a manifestation of this lack of confidence is excessive use of quotes. We can see papers that are Frankenstein's monsters of quotes just sewn together in the hope that somehow that they will turn into an argument just by being stitched together in a kind of a strange kind of order, without that voice, without that through line coming through. Now, I'm sure in most circumstances that is because the writer lacks the confidence to express their own voice. But it's scary, it's difficult, but you've got to start practicing and doing it, because if you don't, you're not going to learn how to do it. And sometimes you have to overstep the mark. Sometimes you have to make mistakes and get feedback on those mistakes in order to develop. And by playing it safe, what you're doing is not only not having a chance to learn, but often you're going to end up failing because you play it too safe. You don't actually do any analysis at all. All you do is regurgitate a whole lot of sources. Okay, let's finish up with some tips and some suggestions as how to avoid those pitfalls and how to develop your own skills of critical analysis. First of all, make sure that you have a strong argument and that argument is well developed as you go into the writing process. Make sure there's a clear thread or backbone that runs through the entire paper. That thread will help you decide whether an element of your research is relevant and something that you can tie in, analyse and examine, or is one of those peripheral issues that you can neatly excise. Use topic sentences. A topic sentence is the sentence in each paragraph that defines the whole paragraph. In fact, you should be able to cut out all the sentences from a paper except the topic sentences, and the paper should still make sense. The other sentences in the paragraph expand on the topic sentence. They illustrate, they connect, they do all these other things, but the topic sentences are what makes the backbone of the paper. Now, if you do that, you'll find that you've got the right framework, the right foundation to start working on your critical analysis, and you'll have a strong reason as to why you've put everything in there. The second issue is to think about balance in your argument. Sometimes people lack critical analysis because they simply haven't presented the other side, and it is more difficult to argue that you're right about something if you don't argue what the other side of the debate is, because you just say, well, I'm right and therefore I'm right. A good critical analysis raises the other alternative points of view, the other perspectives, and then rebuts them and finds the reasons why your perspective is the correct one. So again, sometimes lack of analysis is because you just haven't put those other perspectives, points of view and opinions in there and have nothing to compare yourself to. Third, think back to that list from a moment ago of pitfalls and seriously look at your own writing. Take a long, good, hard look at something you've written. Possibly not something you've just written, that's probably a bad idea, but something you wrote 6 months ago, something you wrote 12 months ago. Have a look for those flaws and ask yourself, are any of these bad habits that I have, and are these habits that I can do something about? And finally, as a general piece of advice, practice the craft of writing. Write something every day. Critically examine what you've written, even if it's just an email. Take it apart. Think about why you've made the design choices you have. Why have you put the words in the order that you have? Why have you put the paragraph breaks where they are? And every day read something. I don't mean reading something on social media or something on your phone. I mean, actually read something of importance, something of some depth, and look at the craft that's exercised there. When you're listening to a song, think about the way in which the lyrics are constructed. You're watching something on TV, think about the way in which the screenwriter constructs a scene and the way in which dialogue is constructed. Do it in your academic reading as well. Think about what works and what doesn't, and think about the way the people who are really good communicators are arguing a point and are convincing you of that point. And also have a look at the bad ones as well, because it can be very, very illuminating to look at something and go, you know what, if they did this, that would have been better. So hopefully this will has introduced you to the topic of critical analysis and has given you some pointers going forward as to how to develop those skills.